Klikovac is a Bosnian poet living in London since 1993. His work is published in Bosnia, other countries of the former Yugoslavia, Britain and elsewhere. Kerry, Munster and Irish poet John Mcauliffe is currently translating a collection of Klikovac's work into English. Mcauliffe has said of Klikovac that he is a poet whose work is shaped by his Sarajevo roots as by his travels. The poems, often up in the air, between places, among the clouds that increasingly pass over European nations, are brilliantly observed, ironic, densely material, then spaciously open to what he misses and remembers and could do justice to. Very little of Igor's work available in English currently. There's one in the January issue of the Poetry Foundation website if you want to catch up with it after. But I'm going to listen to some of them now. Thank you, Igor.
All of the poems that you'll hear tonight are from the book called Stockholm Syndrome. And the book charts this living between, Sarajevo and London. And it was unintentional. And I was thinking even how lazy I am. I remembered how Czeslaw Milosz said that, he berates himself for being so lazy, not traveling too much. And then, saying, excusing himself, saying that he finds everything interesting wherever he is. And I was thinking maybe that's me. But the book sort of oscillates between London and you'll see all the poems are, either about living in London or Sarajevo. And although the poems are not about, none of the poems are about the war, I see the presence of the war in all of them. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. I sort of had a feeling, when I finished the book, that this line between 2 points, almost as, similar to mathematics, when you have 2 points, you have an answer. It sort of created a space for me, where I can take anything from the present, any event, the smallest event, and in that space between London and Sarajevo, between past and the present, then I can hand over something to the past, and when the past has worked on it, I have the poem. So in a way, I don't know if I'm making this clear, but in a way, every successful poem, I see as unlocking of a new history. I'm not really sure that, every time when I take something between, and put it in that space which was created, by constantly, oscillating between Sarajevo and London, a new history was created for me personally. Anyway, let's start. So the only two poems that refer to war are basically me leaving the war. The first one is untitled. Getting ready for a trip. In a borrowed sports bag, you pile clothes upon books. Small things out of sight, you deliberately forget. You think to yourself. Unbidden haste, the Czech tourist's itching feet spurs you on. You'd like to go as far as possible, but zipping up the bag, you feel you already arrived somewhere. Open scissors on the table, small change in the lee side of a pocket. Outside, the motors are thundering. As far as you are now, you'll never get. The next poem is also, it's a different description of the same event, basically. It's also about me leaving the town. And it's slightly more humorous than the first one. It's called The Rat's Decision. Dogs were slowly going rabid. Cats, it was assumed, had simply walked out. Blue bottles had a field day. You want to see what the rats are doing, a neighbor said. If they stay, it'll be bad. But if they leave, it's a no-hoper. So we played chess and waited for the sign until one day the others told me that he left too, the rat expert. Months later with Swallows, I was on my way out when I saw a forgotten classmate on the enemy checkpoint going through people's papers, and I thought stupidly, it's true. Everyone will have a story about the war. A borrowed name in the pocket, my own in the coat's lining, I started praying to the god of rats that this doesn't become mine. This poem is called Gratitude to Big Cities. Those days when all pages are empty are best given to running. Knowing your own name is less important if the streets are long and better still, freshly scrubbed by rain. Then it looks like you're jumping from one facade to another above the outstretched necks and open windows, and that alone already feels like an improvement. Under the colored canopies, through the courtyards of tiny churches, over the pedestrian bridges that cross no water, through the sleepy eyes of rear mirrors, from shop window to shop window, like a rambling thought. Underneath you, the specially designed souls squeal, and manhole covers rattle with the rhythm of images, barely catching up with their own mortality statistics. The problem of the cracked self, thus reduced to a simple breathing exercise, at the end simply solves itself, like a common cold. When finally you open your eyes, the world is again joined up by words, like yellow stitching in a pair of blue jeans, and the woman taking a jumper from a washing line and smelling it, while behind her, in the distance, away the balloon rises, is already surrounded by that insatiable whiteness, the one which never lets out what it once swallowed. This is too small, I have to. This poem is called Net Leapers, and it's subtitled Birth of a Language. Since I first heard about it, I always wanted to see people eating pain. Now, as they sit behind the long table with hands stretched out onto the white tablecloth, they look like a fed-up delegation or an amateur club waiting for the arrival of a grandmaster. The daydreamy looks show they are reeling in that concentration, summoning that peace which champions and mass murderers walk upon. Whether they want to remember or forget something, who would know except themselves? But without that, I realize the whole business is nothing but a lesson in punctured expectations, noisy, too fast for the eye, with no revelations or ontological cookie at the end. Something, in fact, that pushes itself right out of one's mind as soon as the waiters start to lift the plastic basins and uncouple the tables. The green-tongued competitors exit and belch thunderously in the emptying parking lot. This is one of the shorter prose pieces from the book, from Stockholm Syndrome. It's called The River. Standing on the back, I see them pull something black and heavy from the water, and beside a tied sack and a stiff dog, unload a paddle with two limp arms and no hands. There is no one in the coat, and workers crouch and lean over the river as if it itself were a question. Where is the owner? Did he leave the coat before or after? And was he at least a little sorry for the old coat, for the spent life? The river replies with silence, and the coat, the carcass, and the secret held by the sack touch each other with profiles like hieroglyphs. The water could not understand them, so now the hooks, the rain, and human horror of dying negotiate the meaning. Who is who and what is what in that sentence, which, however things got shuffled, ends in a small death. Like all knots, this one too pushes the handler back, demands retracing of steps. But the semantics needs weight, it always needs some. Otherwise it's nonsense or someone else's business. So it's not long before you see it pointing the finger. You're doing your own maths, so chip in, use your own numbers. It's mean of language this, how quickly a word turns personal, more or less as soon as it's abandoned by speech and touched by a thought. Not much time for a pause, just a breath really. And you're not holding an apple in a supermarket, but those brownies you jumped fences for as a kid. Clearly this has its uses and there's no other way, but still it's inconsiderate. You don't always want to remember, not every time something's parked in front of your mind. A soaked overcoat and a dead dog, a loaded sack, of course. The long lost, forgotten friends and crumbled friendships, a betrayal of trust, a lost love, an unreturned favor, an unresolved dispute, a short shrift, severe consequences, things kept from you, things you kept from others, a slide, a slip, a fall, a splash. The whole sorry shebang, the touched bottom, the slow rot. Or maybe just faces of the miserable old whiners from charity ads. Underneath the words drying on the deck, the river couldn't be more different. It's steady, uniform, and truly endless. It'll show obstinacy or no will at all. It'll be a sharp, blind metaphor and the most boring thing in the world. Annoyingly, sometimes both at the same time. In fact, it'll appear to be so many things that the only safe truth about it will probably be what one sees before any serious thinking. Water moving from one place to the other. With the world beside it, it has a simple contract. It admits only that which has passed, that's complete. This poem is called Childhood, and it's sort of, not intentionally, but tonight it sort of forms a little circle with a couple of other poems which sort of trace my obsession with weather and my love for snow, you know, and part of it is definitely the fact that there's no snow in London, you know, whatsoever. And instead of snow you get Christmas, but the other two poems are about it. The childhood. The hard crust of our city's ice, black engine oil and crushed kisses on cigarette butts. For a child, that water could remember was entirely logical, and yet no less magic, and hence full of news about what was coming. But the landscape remained grey too, like a spent, badly lit filming location, full of soot and fooled people frozen in unwitting pirouettes. All else was too fast, decideful or simply mute and directed at others. The life trickled into a shallow bowl and disappeared before lips were brought to it. Only the discarded and the occasional kindness of weather could be relied on in a slippery world. Nowadays, whenever I step into myself through a puddle, I startle, as I did back then, peering over the kitchen sill, each time the winter stretch between the buildings got unstitched by the trucks spraying salt. This poem is called Snow Spotting. It's sort of self-evident. What is it about? Snow spotting. All night and morning spent tapping on the forecast, a live score for a long and goalless game, and when the snow finally announces itself to its one English fan, it's like someone's last remains scattered over the city from the moon. One name for disappointment, but many faces. I start counting the flakes, not ready yet to give up. Head tipped back beneath the sham, like a plumber squinting in the block pipe. Each year I ask the madness, how did it travel this far with me? And listen, it laugh me off, like a child with no jar in its hand. Maybe there is nothing to remember, no road to retrace. Only a thing handed down in cold sleep and days of unbroken school day gloom, a field stretched flat and empty into an altogether different whiteness. Dry dock. Dry dock is, as I said about Christmas, my experience of Christmas. It's one of the things that we never celebrated it before, and you know, 25 years in London, and it drives me crazy, and everyone goes crazy about it. And I apologize to those who care about it, but it's not even about not caring about it, it's just not having snow. The probable, as you know by now, will fall victim to a fumbled delivery. The dump was warm again, not even a smattering of frost, and wholly no longer spilling over the wall because the neighbor's dog kept self-harming. By the time pining for snow gave way to a bout of seasonal companionship deficiency, the girl from the bookshop was already gone. Family in Kettering, they said, and the world had settled into a freeze, an instant aftermath. Again, the weak sorcery of props and gadgets, coffee, chessboard, cold climate literature, styrofoam in 4x3, was all you had against this thing you failed to learn in time. A whole week nothing stirred except dust and smoke, and small birds kept blending into the garden like vague symbols. Enough became enough when someone came to the door selling knockdown reeds from a cardboard. And I will end with another accidental little circle, just the point that I've chosen for tonight, which sort of, puts a little full stop to this, thing between Sarajevo and London, and, me leaving. The first poem of the three is called Elegy for the Leavers. And it sort of deals with the maybe possibility of endless numbers of perception of an aftermath. How the wars get published and republished and reported and numerous times, but there's always something that's true and that stays behind the door with those who experience them. Books devoured what was left in the open. The endings with set trees and smoking roofs falling off the suitcase mound in the back window of a bus, a curtain limply waving the forfeited youth goodbye, and the overload of surprise at the aptness of killers, at limbs still reaching for something from the hospital rubbish. The mad courage, the boredom, the loss of innocence through selfless thoughts, all built into plots, published and documented fairly, say maybe a slippery thing or two. How treason works through gravity and death through entanglement, particle-like. That noise does its worth in perfect quiet. That twice dispossessed now speak in parables, even to a postman, guiding the virtue of almost nothing that remains. Someone did leave at dawn and saw sparrows hover in the yellow sky above the bus, like gulls hoisted by a cruise liner. Someone remembered the stub of coal through the front teeth and voices of women beside the water pump in the mountain. And just one side of the border, that lightning-quick outpour of mind into the harshness of land, the sudden catch of not taking but leaving behind. This they repeat when no one else is around. It must, after all, mean something. Hope and voice fighting with detail. No regret, only the watchfulness of thoughts treading backwards, like rain falling upwards. Words scoff at themselves for saying it. This poem is called Sarajevo. Laid out badly around comings and goings, the city tells you once again, you owe nothing, I gave you nothing, or rather you wanted nothing. Then you size each other up like snipers from the opposite side of the river, trigger muscles for an instant numbed by the spring's warmth. You can't escape that, but it doesn't upset any longer. Only when you see the life grown over the remains of yours, you give in and ask the images to speak up as if they could. Once, remember, you believed that if you stayed long enough, you'd see yourself in the hurrying crowd. Only now you know that that's impossible. What comes before the forgetting is insecure about itself too. It pulls the sleep from the dark like hooks jutting from the crumbling houses, long since not really sure themselves what they were for. The last to admit the defeat, it's true, are the smells of the thick window pane, smoke in the linen table pots. Someone, that much is clear, has to fire first. The gunshot echoes in the world already altered, and only the broken thought about the beauty of the spring that leaves the dead body lingers a moment or two in the old one. And I will finish with, appropriately, I will finish with a poem called Stockholm Syndrome, which is printed in a very small print. I'd often seen a runway kissed by refugees and bought out hostages, and know the drunk and those renouncing the flying for good, and thought that truly there must be worse places to touch freedom. Between the tail fins and the grey town in the distance, gravity cropped up only in the newsstand and fizzled out with the first bite of the octane dump, the view of the parking bunkers and stacked hovels by the motorway. Everything else before and after could have fitted into half a cigarette. The sickly sunshine, the endless nights, the flags and oaths, the very language I wanted to forget. The Celts, the Saxons, the housebroken Vikings in crowded trains, hopping frozen behind stalls, selling tat to tourists. Not enough time for loving because of other lives, no code books or guides except the perennial A to Z of not giving offense. The words were always there, smooth like pebbles, soap on the tongue. And sometimes the mockery of a commonplace, like that time when we put up a blackened Union Jack instead of curtains between us and the poles on the scaffolding across the road. On occasions it seemed good enough to be happy or scared with the rest, to bring home from the terraces and parades that sly acceptance, to sit in a shadow of atavism as under a palm tree and chew blissfully on the sweet dirt, the taste of the crowd. Or for an evening make a shortcut through someone else's work, an income, a story of homeland gain, not lost, a fat compendium of patriotic verse, in essence cheat again. In other words, never spend too much on a suit rarely worn. If there had been loyalty at all, it fell on faces and disappeared with them, on promises and smiles, crazy schemes for finding undiscovered shores. The world, I thought, could be unfolded anywhere, if only you could fit it into a travel bag, into a clear, irrevocable word. It's strange, perhaps, that even today I think the same, still in the same place, buried firmly like a rock in a graveyard, as heavy and as pointlessly decorated by lightness. The vows of yesterday skim the heights like cannibal shapes you recognize in passing clouds. Postcards sleep in unread books. Just like the nomadic tribes I used to, I learn of myself only with my feet now, from the single map that remained. And when the streets bring the shortened future a bit nearer, with an open palm I seek the roughness of facades, and in the friendly pain I find the coarse, unperfected truth of things. This, I think, then, must be what it's like in the bellies of gigantic cannibals. Wet and quiet, almost pleasant, once you get used to the smell of those who passed through before you, and the immutable truth that there is no going forward or anywhere else. Thank you.
Iain Wagner was born in Hamburg and lives in Berlin. He studied English and American studies at Hamburg University and at Trinity College, Dublin. A literary critic and translator, he is the author of poetry collections Probebolung in Himmel, Lyrisches Sperling, 18 Pastetten, which takes its title from Samuel Pepys' 18 Pies, and Australine. His general good taste can be measured by the fact that he is the German translator of Charles Simic, Matthew Sweeney, and James Tate, all who have a penchant for quirky narratives that skim the edges of realism while revealing quintessential human truths. And Wagner's own work has much in common with that aesthetic stance, albeit with a more interested approach to music and form than any of those Anglophone poets. In an interview with the Goethe Institute, Wagner has said, "A poem brings into harmony, into chime, a maximum of linguistic devices in the smallest possible area, a maximum of music and meaning. It unites opposites and paradoxes, brings together the seemingly irreconcilable, and all the while it preserves the fundamental poetic virtues of surprise, joy in play, and breaking rules, and so embodies the greatest possible freedom within the narrowest space." He himself has been translated into English by Michael Hoffman in his Faber Anthology of German Poetry, by Iain Galbraith in Self-Portrait of a Swarm of Bees, Wagner's first solo volume in English, published by Arc in Britain, and most effectively and convincingly, in my opinion, by Galway's Eva Burke in an extended selection published by Poetry Ireland Review some years back, in Poetry Ireland Review, I should say. Wagner has received the Max Kade German Writer in Residence at Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio. He has received the Anna Zegers Prize, the Ernst Meister Prize, and the Arno Reinfrath Literature Award. Not yet 50, Wagner recently received the Georg-Büchner Prize, the necessary prerequisite for any German writer who ultimately takes the Nobel Prize. Please welcome Iain Galbraith.
An essay on midges. As if all the letters had suddenly floated free of a paper and formed a swarm in the air, they form a swarm in the air. Of all that bad news telling us nothing, those skimpy muses, wispy Pegasuses, only a buzz with a hum of themselves, made from the last twist of smoke as the candle is snuffed. So light, you can hardly say they are. Looking more like shadows, ombre, jettisoned by another world to enter our own, they dance, their legs finer than anything pencil can draw, with their minuscule sphinx-like bodies, the Rosetta Stone, without the stone. Hello, thank you very much for this invitation to Cork. It's a pleasure to be here. I will read these German poems in English translation, and I'm bound to make mistakes in pronunciation. If I do, feel free to laugh. But do remember I'm German. The next poem is dedicated to an everyday object that everybody knows. It's a poem about sheets, bed sheets. Although I have to say it's not about the stretch or the elastic sheets, but the classical white linen you have to fold together with two people. Sheets. Grandfather was embalmed in his and carried out. And I discovered him 1 year later when we changed the beds, shriveled to a wasp, tiny furrow of a long gone summer. Sheets were folded by spreading your arms to mirror your opposites across their taut expanse. Then came the laundry foxtrot, each rectangle swallowed by its half, our noses nearly touching. Anything could be hidden in their snowy hearts, an empty vial containing a ghost of perfume, lavender blossoms, or meadow flowers, a penny, the odd clutch of mothballs in their nest. But now they slumbered, mute and white in their cupboards, great piles of them steeped in fragrance, mangled, ironed, and starched, as scrupulously stacked as parachutes before a jump from undreamt of heights. In the well, 6-7 meters free fall, and I was further away than ever before, a cosmonaut in his fieldstone capsule, gazing from afar at the precious round of blue. I was the child in the well. Only the moss climbed the braided twine of itself to the lip. Ivy climbed on shoulders of ivy into the open to freedom. Now and then the white flesh of a bird, off and on the white bird flash. I ate anything slower. The moon slid over the opening, a boffin's eye at the microscope. Just when the words Slater and Stone had begun to mean Slater and Stone, noise arrived, a hollering and hurrying. In front of my nose began a rope. I went back to tolling bells, Back to bread smells and bus times, to shade under the trees and talking about the weather, went back to christenings and tragedies, to the headlines of which I was one. The next poem is dedicated to a very stubborn weed that every gardener hates, because you can eat it, but you can't eat so much of it as to clear the whole garden from it. In German it's called Giersch, and the whole poem plays around with that name because it contains the word gier in itself. It means greed. So it's quite fit to be in that particular weed's name. So maybe I will read the poem both in the German original to give you an idea of how it sounds like, and to give you an idea of the German I write anyway, and then the translation by Iain Galbraith, who chose another weed, or had to choose another weed to make that work at all in the English version. So the German's called Giersch. Nicht zu unterschätzen, der Giersch, mit dem Begehren schon im Namen. Darum die Blüten, die so schwebend weiß sind, keusch wie ein Tyrannentraum. Kehrt stets zurück wie eine alte Schuld, schickt seine Kassiber durchs Dunkel, unterm Rasen, unterm Feld, bis irgendwo erneut ein weißes Widerstandsnest emporschießt. Hinter der Garage beim knirschenden Kies der Kirsche, Giersch, als Schäumen, als Gischt, der ohne ein Geräusch geschieht, bis hoch zum Giebel kriecht, bis Giersch schier überall sprießt, im ganzen Garten Giersch über Giersch schiebt, ihn verschlingt, mit nichts als Giersch. Bindweed. Do not underestimate the bindweed. Its need for wreath and stifle rooted deep in its name. Hence, the blossom, blinding, white, as chaste as a tyrant's dream. Like an ancient crime and unpaid debt, it returns to haunt a scene. By cover of darkness, beneath the fields or a lawn, it sends out feelers, fires a riot, rises glorious in green. Behind the barn, convolved in cypress or bean, the unkind climber spirals, a seething, creeping spume. It twines up walls and roam, choking windows and drain, trumpeting, binding, abiding, till nothing breathes but bindweed, and nothing more is seen. Two reptile poems. Chameleon. Older than the pastoral staff, it drags along behind it, its crook of a tail. Come down, we call to it on its branch, while its telescope tongue snaps out to consume a dragonfly constellation. An astronomer gazing simultaneously at the sky and the ground, keeping his distance from both. The dome of its eye, armor-plated with scales, is a fortress. Only a pupil moves within, an edgy flicker behind the arrow's slit. Sometimes you'll find its skin like some deserted outpost or long-discarded theory. Come down, we call, but it doesn't budge, vanishing slowly among the colors, hiding itself in the world. Gecko. Caught napping when the light flicks on, off it goes, scurrying across the wall. A shifting fissure closing up behind itself, its momentum splitting the whiteness as it runs, red and throbbing, a tiny gash of lava. Here is what they say about it in the shadow of Etna, that it only inhabits the houses of people who have a gentle spirit. The rooftops of Syracuse, the waves of Messina. Days later, its pale belly against the gravel path, within hours, seething ants are perfectly imitating its shape, a teeming mimicry. The Sicilian fishing boat lies bottom up on the beach, a wreck, with its rigging already turned porous and bleached by the sun. On the following morning, There is nothing left of it but its delicate spine, a white twig that soon will have vanished, a mere toothpick in the gaping maw of August. The next poem is taken from that book called 18 Pies, which contains a sequence with 18 poems dedicated to food and love, all based on a quotation by Samuel Pepys, where food and love are brought together. So it's starting with shepherd's pie and goes on with pâté d'arance, herring pie, and finishes with 3 sweet dishes, the last one of which I will read. Quince jelly. When October hung them among the leaves, those bulging lanterns, then it was time. We picked ripe quinces, lugged the baskets of yellow bounty into the kitchen, soused the fruits in water. The pears and apples grew towards their names to a simple sweetness, unlike quinces. Clinging to branches in some shadowy border's alphabet, obscure in our garden's Latin, tough and foreign in their aroma. We cut, quartered, cored the flesh we were 4 adult hands, 2 somewhat smaller. Veiled by clouds of steam from the blender, poured in sugar, heat, and effort to something that, raw, made our palates balk. But then, who could? Who would hope to explain them? Quinces, jellied, lined up in bellied jars on shelves and set aside for the darkness, stored for harsher days, a cellar of days in which they shone, are still shining. Seesaw. Make yourself heavier, they call. I close both eyes, thinking of sacks of cement, iron foundries, and elephants. An anchor sinking in deep mud while a fleet of whales maneuvers above it an anvil's bullish head. For a while, I hold my breath and wait, to no avail. Nothing goes up, nothing goes down. A pheasant screams, leaves fall. My legs, too short, will never reach the ground. My head is well nigh in the clouds. The West. The river thinks in fish. What was it then that Sergeant Henley was the first to wrest from its grasp? Its eyes staring yellow, its barbels 2 poker hooks around an ash-grey mouth that made even our dogs whimper. We are following the rapids and their raging grammar to the source. The distant haze of mountains, grassy plains, and now and then a native throwing an amused look in our direction only to vanish in the forest. All this we enter on Adam's ancient chart, naming species and deeds. Fever in our muscles, and week for week, a diet of roots and trust in God. Under our shirts, ticks like pearl-headed pins in our skin, the wilderness taking our measure. Strange feeling, being the frontier, the point of ending and beginning. At night by the fire, our blood circles above us in clouds of mosquitoes, while we sew the hides together with hard fish bones, shoes for our destination, blankets for our dreams. Before us, untouched land. Behind us, the raving settlers, their carter of fences and gates. Behind us, the covered wagons of traders, gigantic cities full of noise and future. The next poem is about horses and poetry, or poetry and horses, and it goes back to a quotation preceding that poem. It's by Michael Donaghy, who himself refers to Lu Chi. The lines go, "The well-aimed phrase is a whip, your poem A horse. A horse. Could it be chestnut, grey or black, stallion or mare, trotting through the garden to attack the rhubarb stalks and lavender? Jumping the triple bar only to land plumb in the middle of the field of battle, hitched to a cart loaded with barrels and a golden pyramid of hay. Or a cart horse, heaving from Brabant, its heavy heart and plough, a V as light as a wild goose flight, or Lipizan, born dark and born to prance through any terrain, pale as Pierrot, a triumph holding the world in suspense, radiant as an emperor's jabot. And naturally, you could assemble its 252 bones in your sleep. And you know its kick as painful as knowing oneself, the skillful whip of their tails, dun shadows rubbing their skin on the paddock fences at night, their woe and giddy up, the smothered whinny in the tomb of conqueror or pharaoh. And yet, here you are, as red in the face as a cursing drayman, in your pocket inspiration's sugar lump, and this beast that won't move forward, won't move back, wholly ignoring your crop, unruffled, unimpressed by the carrot you dangle before its nose on a string, like a candle held to an icon. Budge, you beg, a tremble. It doesn't move. It stands, surveying the land. 3 more poems. The first is a poem about and for the American stuntman Evel Knievel, who died about 10 years ago after many jumps across all sorts of things, double-decker buses, burning stacks of wood, almost across the Grand Canyon, but across other canyons as well. And always on his motorbike, before dying peacefully in bed after many broken bones. And the poem is preceded by a quotation by Igor Klikovac, who used to say, "God, take care of me. Here I come." Elegy for Knievel. The landscape blurred as soon as it saw him. A daredevil, a son of a gun with a star-spangled shirt and a bike engine's swarm of angry hornets constantly in pursuit. His bones broke, his bones fixed, and he jumped. How many obstacles between the ramp and that distant point? How many decommissioned double-deckers? Did he feel those misgivings cutting into his innermost self until a whole canyon gaped, with sand trickling away at the edges and the screams of giant birds? On such afternoons, history might take pause for a moment, sweet with exhaust fumes and popcorn. Like this one in Yakima, Washington, with a bruised moon slung over the stadium and thousands holding their breath. 15, 20 buses, and the wheel standing still in mid-air. Self-portrait with a swarm of bees. A moment ago, I wore at best a fuzz around my chin and lips. But now my beard is growing and seething. I might even pass for Magdalena. All my face hirsute with bees. How they come buzzing from every side, and ounce by ounce, how a person's being slowly but steadily gains in weight and spread to become the stone-still center of song. My arms outstretched, I bear a resemblance to some ancient knight whom bustling varlets help to fit his suit of armor piece by piece. First the helmet, then the harness, arms, legs, nape, until he can hardly move. Who does not tread, just stands there gleaming with barely a hint of wind behind the luster, lingering breath, and only vanishing becomes distinct. The last poem is very short, and it's a play with that most popular Japanese form, the haiku, that you all know, and it's so short that you can read the German and the English. To give you another taste of the German original, the German title being Teebeutel. Teebeutel. 1. Nur in Sackleinen gehüllt, kleiner Eremit in seiner Höhle. 2. Nichts als ein Faden führt nach oben. Wir geben ihm 5 Minuten. Teabag. 1. Draped only in a sackcloth mantle, the little hermit in his cave. 2. A single thread leads to the upper world. We shall give him 5 minutes. Thank you.
Igor, what's it like to write in a language you're no longer immersed in, surrounded by?
What's like to write in English?
No, you're writing in Serbo-Croatian, aren't you, still?
Well, the poetry, yes.
Yeah. And I mean, like, do you feel it at a disadvantage not, being surrounded by this ocean of English while you're writing in Serbo-Croatian?
Well, it doesn't affect poetry, but it affects other things. But, writing poetry and everything else is different.
So what things does it affect, other than the lack of snow?
Poetry, you have to go to do strange things and go to strange places and your linguistic being is better protected from the surrounding. But writing other things, I do write in English.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter. Someone mentioned Adamski's essays, and he was asked about that, and I sort of had the pleasure of talking to him about that, and he just, he thought that was, he lived in Paris, as you know, for a long time. And he said, it's a non-issue for me, he said, I've never had inkling, that's the same with me, I never had feeling that the Bosnian voice has been attacked by English. And then, with everything else, I just started writing in English because it was easy. Just didn't even think about it.
And would the variety of Serbo-Croatian you speak and write, would it be subtly different from the language that I write in Croatia, the language that I write in Serbia, the way...
It's very different because Bosnian is a different language to Serbian and Croatian.
Yeah.
that makes it. I mean, there are obviously different schools of thought about that. But, I would put my craft in. If you ask linguists, then maybe not. But if you ask a philosopher for help, then he will.
Fair enough.
He will tell you that it is.
Okay. Yeah, and you obviously have a great love of literature and English. I mean, would your literary precursors be both German and English, do you think?
Yeah, definitely.
And who? Well, I guess we can guess from the people you've translated who your English and Anglophone influences might be. Who would be your great German influences?
Well, quite a few. When I started out, the so-called early expressionists were very important for me. Georg Heim, that lovely young poet who died 21 while ice skating close to Berlin. I loved his poetry, but also Georg Trakl, whom I still like a lot. And I mean, you can't get around, of course, and don't want to get around poets like Wilhelmy and others, Ingeborg Bachmann and Celan. But another poet whom I greatly adored and tried to study intensely was Peter Huchel, the poet, also from the 20th century.
Yeah.
But there are too many to mention. It goes on and on. And you discover poets writing now, writing the first book now, and you come to adore them.
Okay. And as somebody who's fluent in English, how interfering are you with your English translators when they translate your work?
I hope not too much.
Yeah.
I'm aware that it can be very painful if,
Yeah.
if the person you translate speaks your language and always inquires about the words and says, listen, couldn't we use that phrase? And wouldn't that word make more sense in that context? And it can be very troubling, I'm sure. But I hope I don't do that. On the other hand, when I translate English language posts, I'm happy if they say something. So a little bit of cooperation is quite fruitful, I think.
And do you ever try?
Always questions you can't solve. Always meanings you don't really get because it's there's this meaning only in some part of the English-speaking world or some sub-meaning you don't get. And so I'm for one, I'm grateful if somebody tells me, listen, you didn't quite get that. Being a German, it doesn't mean something else in Yorkshire.
And are you ever conscious of translating the English poets into a more musical German?
Do I try to do that?
Yeah.
No. It should be as musical in translation as it is in the original.
Okay.
I think that's the best way to do it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be true to the original. A certain musicality or alliteration is avoided in the original. You shouldn't necessarily put it in. I believe you shouldn't insert that in your translation.
Yeah.
But if it is, you should try the best you can to make it as musical as possible.
Okay. Any questions from the floor?
Could Igor read a poem in his own language?
Yeah, it's interesting.
I have to apologize to you. I don't have any. I really didn't even think about reading so. And then we were talking about it before, and I was thinking, what was I thinking? I was so focused on getting the English translation completely forgotten. I'm so sorry. I should have done it. I was listening to Jan reading beautiful German. I was thinking, God, I should have brought some. Next time, maybe.
Yes, Julia.
I'm interested in how it feels to perform a poem of your own in translation, because the musicality must be different, even if it's equivalent. Does it feel like riding a horse or a different animal or playing a different instrument? I'm asking Jan particularly,
Yes.
but I'm both.
It is very strange. Everybody knows that you are not necessarily a completely different person when you're speaking a different language, but you give a different impression and you are behaving differently, and maybe your sense of humor is a different one. So I do recognize the poems when I read them, but I don't even read them as I would read the German version. I try to, but it's different. So yeah, it's like trying on some other clothing and then trying to walk or possibly even dance with it. But it's strange.
Igor.
It's very, very difficult. We talked about it yesterday a little bit, and that was actually we sort of had a joke about it. I said, I cheated a little bit. I had to change some words because they're just not coming out of your mouth.
Exactly.
And I've spent a quarter of a century, living in English. That's not enough. I can speak, but reading the poetry, and then when you write them, and I'm guessing, when someone is translating, you don't really do that for you're trying to do something else. You don't really think, at least with my poems, I think I can say, you really don't think about them really well. The original you do, and then you said some musicality has to be preserved. And then if really an ideal world, the poem reveals itself as an act. Obviously, you have to do that. You have to try. But then it comes to the words that have to be there. They're good on the paper, but that just tells you how different the purpose of performance and writing it. They're different things.
Yeah.
And have the translations revealed anything about your poems that you weren't aware of beforehand?
Certainly,
Especially I'm thinking of when the same poem has possibly been translated by different people. They must be quite different.
Yeah. Every single translation has a different solution, and it's fascinating to watch what happens in the process of transferring one poem of a certain language into another language. It's always exciting, and and certain things, are changed. But at the same time, I think there's too often talk about the loss being involved, and there's a lot of gain involved as well. And it's beautiful to see how certain things work in the target language, which you couldn't have thought of, because that particular structure or that particular word doesn't even exist in your own language. I did write a poem about the koi, the carpfish once, and had in German an image playing around with the blinking of coins. And of course, in the English version, the koi, the fish, is in the word coin already. That's wonderful, and that does happen. That's a gain, certainly, not a loss. And it's something I wish I could have done in German, but couldn't.